Welcome everyone to Quantum Leap. I'm your host, Toyin Umesiri, author of Mindset of an Entrepreneur. To me in the studio here in Aurora, Illinois, is my guest, Mr. Paul Jazenbeck. Mr. Paul is the president and CEO of LR International. LR International is a full service international freight forwarding company that has been operating for over 30 years and have obtained some of the industry's highest awards and recognitions. It's such a pleasure and a delight to have you, Paul.
Toyin, thank you for having me. My company, as Toyin said, is an international freight forwarder and customs broker. We're based here in Chicago. We're a Chicago family, actually, that started in the logistics business about 36 years ago. We help exporters and importers move their goods around the world. That's the shipping part of what we do. We also help them with documentation, risk management, and getting things delivered either to or from remote places around the world. We're also a packaging company, so some of our clients need help with things like boxing and crating and things of that nature. We handle hazardous material, all 9 classes, which is a bit unique these days. And we're also a full service domestic transportation company moving cargo around the United States.
Yes. And also, fun fact, you and I both serve on the Illinois District Expo Council by appointment of the U.S. Secretary of Commerce. So pretty much you know what you're doing.
Well, we try. We try. Yeah, my partner, who is since retired, but was a member of the Illinois District Export Council for over 20 years, and then I actually was able to be appointed to take his seat when he retired. So yeah, we've been involved in the Chicago area export and import community for quite a long time.
Oh, fantastic. Again, excited to have you. Thank you for coming all the way down here. Now, let's get deeper dive into the discussion. When it comes to logistics, international trade development, what would you say the current state of the industry looks like? How is it faring today?
Well, we've had a lot of turmoil. COVID was a real eye opener because it showed that our industry, and I think many industries had this, our industry was not prepared for what happened there. And carriers, whether that's airlines, steamship lines, trucking companies, railroads, had to adjust what they were doing in light of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And that created space constraints. In our business, space availability, whether that's on an airplane or on a ship, that's really an important part of the process, because if there's no space, then exporters and importers can't get their goods across the ocean
Mm-hmm.
to each other. And during COVID, there were significant space constraints and a lot more steps to the process because of the pandemic. So then the pandemic subsided, and the industry had to sort of right itself, which certainly happened. But then we had another problem, or a series of problems, and that was things like inflation, strife around the world, wars, and other things that created delays or lack of space. And then some natural issues like low water levels in the Panama Canal, and it's just some challenges that create longer transit times, higher prices, and the current state right now is that space is available. Rates are lower than they were during the pandemic, but there are other challenges out there that are elongating transit times and just creating some real challenges right now. And so it's a difficult market, and I would say the level of activity from a global trade standpoint is certainly down from what it was, a couple of years ago.
Right, right. And this is quite fascinating because for me, my background is logistics supply chain, working with Walmart, right?
Yeah.
Fortune 1. And one of the things that usually happens is that the customer, right, the retail customer really doesn't know what's happening in the moment, because behind the scene you're trying to buffer a whole lot of shifts, right, in the supply chain. And it
Right.
takes a while for it to catch up and show up in maybe price increases, low shelf availability, all of those things. Is that as of right now, there's probably 3 months of, engagements, um, shifts, adjustments happening behind the scenes in order to make sure that when the customer shows up to a retailer, for example, like your customers, right, that it's right there. What they need is right there, like tissue papers and all of those things. So I just wanted to say, depending on who is watching, right, listening, if you're an end consumer, if you're a customer of a retailer, you're good, right? But this content is really now for businesses, right? Businesses that have to ship in and out, right? Businesses that are considering exporting, businesses that are considering importing. What are the things you need to consider? What are the things you need to be aware of? So I'll go deeper into that. What type of clients do you actually support, right? So for those who are listening, whether they are new to exporting, they've been at it for a while, or they're looking to go on to new markets, what type of customer base does your company support in that space?
I mean, we can help anyone, any company in a business-to-business transaction. So our particular company is not really business-to-consumer. We're involved really in the business-to-business transactions, and then ultimately those products get to the consumer.
Yes.
But our job is really between the initial buyer and seller.
Yes.
Most of our clients we have clients all over the United States, but a big concentration is in about a 14-state region in the Midwestern United States, maybe the Rocky Mountains to the Ohio Valley, and northern Michigan down to maybe Tennessee or Kentucky. That's where about 80% of our clients are situated, and they tend to be manufacturing companies by and large that are making products that companies want to buy in other countries.
Right.
And they may be bringing in inputs, raw materials, or components to make those products, which means they're buying from companies around the world. We have many clients that are very well established and been doing this for 50 years or more, but our company tends to specialize in working with new to export or import companies, just getting started in the process. And we do a lot of extra services and kind of hand holding through the process. That's kind of what we're known for, in our space.
Yes. And it does take a lot of patience when it comes to the newer exporters, because most of the time they make a lot of assumptions. They may not be prepared for the initial uphill, right, climb into the space. But it does take a while for people to be established. So I'm glad to learn that you have the patience, to nurse.
Most of the time.
Yes, it does. It's because I also operate in a space that is not yet mature. Right. So when you think about US Africa trade, which is one of the things that we are leading on, and we're driving that conversation and definitely letting it lead into transaction, is that there's a lot of patience, there's a lot of education, there's a lot of hand holding required to help people get started. Yeah. So I just wanted to put that out there, that you're not alone. There's a lot of help and people ready to help you, because in that entire transaction, there's the buyer, there's the seller, then you right there in the middle. You feel, oftentimes you have to listen to both sides. Is that right?
Yeah, we're sort of the referee maybe of the process. Yeah, we serve multiple masters, we sort of say in our business, because we have the carriers that we work with, and that's a relationship that we have to maintain in order to get good rates for our clients and space when space is tight. Mm-hmm. Certainly, if our customer is the exporter, there are certain things about their sale that we want to make them aware of to make sure they get paid for their transaction. If they don't get paid, it wasn't worth it. Yeah. We might actually be involved through, let's say, our partner in another country. We might be involved in the customs clearance and actual delivery on behalf of the buyer. Yeah. So we may have several parties that are actually our customer on either side of the transaction. Right. So we have to be flexible and try to take everybody's interests into account.
Absolutely.
That's it is tricky at times, but that's kind of our job.
Yes. And it does take a unique skill. It's somewhat of a facilitation and then service, right? delivery side of it. So it's more of trade facilitation and then execution, right?
Right.
So you help them with the strategy, execution, and then the follow up,
Yeah,
right?
exactly that. There are a lot of steps to this. So it's we have clients sometimes who want to kind of leapfrog to the end, but there are a lot of steps that go into actually facilitating that transaction. Making sure all of the appropriate steps have been taken, both on this side from an export compliance standpoint, and then the other side, which is more of the import into that country, let's say.
Yes.
So there are a lot of steps in there. There's some risk mitigation that has to be talked through. I mean, shipping is an imperfect business, and so
Yes.
sometimes things are lost or damaged or what have you. Certainly, everybody in the system tries to prevent that as much as possible, but it's an imperfect process.
Yes.
So those, the what if questions, like what if this happens, then what are we going to do, is something we are doing a lot of with our
Right.
clients.
Right.
You know?
So let's get a little bit into the general global narrative, right? When it comes to regional challenges, when we talk about China, US war, we think about Russia, trade war, we think about Russia, Ukraine. How has that affected your industry? How is your industry responding to the political climate and the global, crisis as well? Is it making people nervous? Is it making them confused? Who are they going to be turning to for that level of support, encouragement, inspiration to just keep moving? Because the business community gets measured differently than political actors, right? The results we want to achieve looks different, but we have to do it in partnership.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, you mentioned results, and I say this a lot. I sort of think that if politicians could kind of step out of the way and let business people solve some of these issues, that I think the outcome might be a little better at times. Because I've been doing this for 35 years, and one of the things that's universal in my career that I've noticed is that no matter what country you go to, people's kind of motivations are kind of the same. By and large, they want to do well at their chosen profession. They want their kids to have a better future than they had. They want them to be educated and learn about the world.
Yes.
So it's no different whether it's here or in Asia or Africa or Europe. Everybody actually has the same goals. And sometimes whether it's sort of political issues, things like trade wars are really just indirect trade barriers that send messages to other countries or show maybe some displeasure with certain parts of the sort of overall relationship, right? So those things, along with some of these other things you mentioned, like conflicts and whatnot, are changing the game on a regular basis for us. We, along with our clients, try to keep up on what's happening today versus yesterday, because sometimes it's literally a day-to-day thing as far as how things are changing. And I would say to anybody out there who's exporting or importing, you have to have the right team of service providers to kind of help you navigate the landscape. And you can't assume that you can just do that all on your own. You have to have those partners out there that are going to lend some insight to what's happening. We have partners all over the world, 6 continents. And when I'm wondering exactly what's happening in Brazil, I go to our partners there and say, tell me what's happening. I don't make the assumption that from Chicago, I can sort of figure out what's happening. I say to them, tell me what's happening on the ground. And that's how we get a lot of our really best information, is from the people who are there. They do the same for us. They ask us what's happening here.
Right. And I think there are winners and losers, because part of what I'm also seeing, particularly in the sourcing world, is more of alternative sources of supply. There's now a new question of, okay, if there's tension, if there's political tension in this space, where else around the world could we get the level of quality, that we seek, right? Because in a way, buyers are not too, connected to just the space. It's more of who can supply to the level of the standards and quality that we want, who can meet the standard that we've established, who can meet it at a time, at a price, right, that we want. And so it's leading to a new conversation of, okay, if buying from this region, right, it's going to be more tense, right? It's making buyers explore territories that probably they wouldn't have taken a look at
For sure.
previously, right?
Yeah.
But some of those regions, because they've never participated in this type of level of mature international trade, global trade engagement, there's a lot of immaturity.
Right.
And I'm seeing that also on the continent of Africa as example is, oh yes, we would like to participate and supply this type of product, but then because for many of them this is the first time ever of participating at that level, right? There's not maturity in that space. So that's something I've seen on the sourcing side. Now on the exporting side, the same thing shows up where there are now new places open to US increased exports. Right. So
Yeah.
it's
I mean,
interesting.
we have what I think it's 22 free trade agreements in place, and certainly some, most favored nation status, more on the sourcing or import side, where, as a country, we're trying to promote trade and maybe at lesser costs, with different countries around the world. But what I tell our clients when they are a little bit apprehensive maybe at, let's say, either sourcing from or selling to certain parts of Africa, if we take that as an example. What I tell them is, look, the world's only getting smaller, and that's not going to change. No matter the political landscape or fear-mongering, the world's just getting smaller, and it's very common now to be interacting with people on the other side of the planet, and there's a lot to be there's a lot that those companies have to offer. 95% of the world's consumers are outside of the United States. So if you ignore anything other than the United States, you're ignoring potentially 95% of the possible customers that you could connect with. So what I tell them is, I say, if you're worried, travel there, go there, and actually, the U.S. Department of Commerce, as an example, has a good gold key program. They'll help connect companies with potential buyers, or at least give them a good understanding of what the dynamics are of that market. You spend a little bit of time there, the concern sort of lessens, the fear peels away a little bit. And so when I have a customer particularly that, let's say, is either selling to or buying from a country or a region that they're unfamiliar with, and I can feel some fear and trepidation there, right, I say maybe the idea is to, take a trip. It doesn't have to be for long, but I think when you interact with people in their normal environment, it's amazing how much easier it is to sort of develop that relationship and come to an understanding, as opposed to trying to do that, just from a technology perspective,
Right. So let's bring this home to Aurora, where we are. When it comes to international trade conversations, international trade explorations, right? It's pretty much concentrated pretty much in Chicago, right? So as a community, second largest city in Illinois, how do we continue to nurture international trade conversations in this city and actually, sensitize and activate more willingness to explore trade? Because again, Chicago is a global city and has a lot of the resources, everything people need, right? A to Z of international trade exploration is right here within an hour of the city. But then, in a way, since I've moved here and I've been here, is that the city seems very close to the conversation, yet distant from the conversation. Yeah. So what should we be thinking about as a community?
Well, first of all, a show like this is good because it sort of brings the conversation to the forefront and people can access it, which is good. And you're right. I mean, Aurora is, from the city, if traffic is light, what is it, 45 minutes maybe, something like that, right? And there are a lot of resources not only in the city, but what's been happening, I would say, especially in the last decade, some of those resources are moving west. and they're sort of getting planted in different suburban locations with a connection to the city. Really in Chicago, because we're in the center of the country, certainly from a transportation perspective, we are at the heart of the U.S. distribution system.
Wow.
I would say Chicago, or the Chicago area, Memphis, Tennessee, maybe Kansas City, Kansas, and Louisville, Kentucky, in the center of the country are really the distribution points if you want to get anywhere. There are some other big ones, of course, on the East Coast, the West Coast, and in the Gulf, but those distribution centers tend to serve more regional customers. So if we talk about JFK, that's really an East Coast distribution center. LAX, the same thing on the West Coast, whether it's Miami or Houston in the South or in the Gulf. But if you really want to get anywhere in the U.S.,
Yes.
we're in the best spot here. And so there are a lot of resources. There are a lot of training and educational opportunities on global trade, both outbound and inbound, that are either free or low cost, that are right here in Illinois or right in the Midwest by either the federal government, the state government, the SBDC centers here, or sort of private/public organizations that are more like trade organizations. So there is a lot of educational opportunity that's probably anywhere from 30 minutes from Aurora to maximum 2 or 3 hours if you drew a circle. Okay. And that would help, exporters or importers or companies in the Aurora area, understand the international opportunities a little better. So there's a lot here. It wouldn't take much at all for a company to do it.
Absolutely. And one of the things I always talk about is the power of trade. And a few years ago, I actually was able to get the CEO of Walmart to really put a message together for me on my platform around why do we still need to keep, prioritizing international global trade, right? So from your perspective, what's the economic advantage for cities like Aurora to actually invest in going global?
Yeah, I mean, as I said before, 95% of the world's consumers are outside of the United States. So there's a huge market out there. There's also, global trade, you put it nicely there. It kind of, when you start trading with people around the world, some of the stigmas or barriers kind of fall away because people are still people. And it's kind of fun to meet people who come from a different area of the world, different cultural background, different upbringing, maybe share a meal. What ends up happening is those people want to come here and we want to go there to facilitate that trade. And,
Right.
and an area like Aurora, potentially has people coming in from overseas because they're interacting with companies in this area that may be buying from those companies around the world.
Right.
And you're just spurring economic activity,
Right.
when you do that. I mean, really, the world, as I said earlier, people around the world are as similar as they are different because their goals and motivations, are the same. And if we only bought things or sold things, in Aurora, let's say to, Illinois, Indiana, or Wisconsin, how small would our world really be?
Right.
So I really believe that global trade and particularly export for any country or any area, any city like Aurora, it is really good for creating jobs and creating new customers and new awareness of the area. So I think it's really important for a community's economic development.
Right. And one of the things that I found several years ago as a secret to really just jumpstarting conversations is about bringing people together, right? Because we all, in the business world, we're all looking for the transaction. Even in the banking world with the exams, banks, they're ready to facilitate the transaction. But what I've seen is that actually the conversation has to happen first. People have to connect first. People have to get to know each other first. People have to build trust People have to build, comfort with one another. They have to get to know one another. And then the transactions that emerge from those conversations is what then, right, experts, banks, buyers, sellers, on the business side want to participate and make happen. So in a very interesting way, part of why I host summits and webinars and engagements like this is because when I talk or speak, right, individually with different stakeholders, with buyers, with exporters, right, with trade financing institutions, with service providers, as we're having this conversation right now, everybody wants the same thing, but people are not talking to one another.
Yeah.
And the uniqueness of international trade is that it happens in community. That's the uniqueness, is that it's not just building a business locally where you can be in your own store and people come in and you sell physically. We actually have to build some form of conversations, whether you go for trade missions or they visit or you host virtual conferences or webinars, right? Because we do business with people we know, like, and trust. That know, like, and trust has to happen before the transactions happen. So in a way, just to encourage people to show up to those conversations, right? Like our deck will be hosting some conversations here in Aurora. So those conversations are important for you to showcase your work, for you to listen to what other people are doing, for you to learn, for you to connect, and then see what happens. Would you agree with me?
Yeah, I mean, it's like when you send your kids off to college or something, you say, well, if you want to meet people, you just have to take the first step, say hello, strike up a conversation. And in business, it's not much different. It's taking the first step, being engaged in, whether it's educational programs or maybe even trade missions or something along those lines. It's just it's still a people business, right? So even though Americans and some other people around the world like Germans and some others are very focused on the transaction, for sure, there are some places around the world where the relationship is much more important initially, and then we get to the transaction. And so you kind of have to know who your audience is,
right,
and be willing to, either accelerate or slow down the process,
right.
Because there are people around the world just culturally who really need to get to know you before they'll buy from you. And that's a little bit different in, Americans, I wouldn't say aren't always that way. I think if it's a quality product at a quality price, an American might be willing to buy more readily without that relationship.
Yeah.
But there are people around the world who definitely will not. So as Americans, we have to be open to that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I'm quite fascinated when you talked about the reach of your partnerships, right? Do you want to talk about that in terms of the work that you do, the breadth, the global footprint that you want? Do you want to just share that?
Yeah, it's critical for us because we have partners on 6 continents in every major market and most of the minor markets around the world. We represent them here, they represent us where they are, kind of like a distributor agreement with manufacturers. And those partnerships are critical because the world's an imperfect place. And so when we help our clients and they've made a sale, and let's say we're shipping the goods to India or pick a country, it doesn't matter. Something's bound to go not quite as planned in that process, whether it's a delay, a problem with the paperwork, maybe it's a weather related delay or issue that nobody can control. Really, how we're measured is when those things happen, because it's not a question of if they will happen, it's really just when. How are we and our partners around the world able to adjust to basically make those occurrences not a big deal, and get through it. So it's really critical, and it's critical for them on this side. If they have customers that are exporting to clients in the U.S., same thing can happen.
Right.
And if we're doing a good job for them and their customers, as they do for ours, everybody's confident in the system. And so for us, that's critical. We've been building that network over 30 plus years, and it's taken a lot of miles and a lot of effort to have those trusted partnerships.
Right.
But again, a lot of that is spending time with those people, whether we are with them in their country or they're here. That's really how you get to know what people are really capable of, is interacting with them whenever possible in person.
Wow. And just when it comes to the US landscape, how easy would you say it is for importers, like people bringing in products, to navigate the US standards and requirements, right? Has it gotten easier, or is it getting more challenging to really penetrate and enter the US market?
So I think it's getting easier, but with a caveat, and that is it depends on the product. Okay. So if you're importing products that are, let's say, heavily regulated by the FDA or another agency, then there are some criteria, and those are kind of expanding because, quite frankly, that's the role of those agencies, is to make sure that, if we're going to ingest something, that it's safe, things of that nature. So I think it depends on the product, but for your sort of garden variety product that doesn't have one of these other government agencies sort of overseeing it, it's actually very easy to import into the United States. Is one of the easiest countries in the world.
Wow.
To be an importer, all you really have to do on the commercial side is have a company tax ID number, be registered somehow with the federal government. There's a bond that's required as an importer that the Customs Service here, Customs and Border Protection, requires, like an insurance policy,
right,
that sort of names Customs and Border Protection as the beneficiary of any duties or taxes that may be owed to them. Right. And then, you have to find a customs broker that can help you interact with Customs and Border Protection. The garden variety company doing that on their own, unless they're a Walmart or someone like that, that's certainly possible. But your small to medium-sized companies, it would be too time-consuming and costly to try to do that. So you need a good partner, a good vendor to do that. And really, at that point, you're ready to go. You can, of course, you've got to price it out and all those things. So the landscape is pretty easy. It does depend on the product.
Right. So as we start wrapping up, what other things would you say a first-time exporter or a first-time importer needs to consider, explore, and even for those who want to kind of take it to the next level, right? What would partnerships like with your company and other maybe government resources, what would you say they should look out for?
Well, one thing I would recommend is get really familiar with what are called the Incoterms, or international trade terms, that are out there. There's 11 official terms put out by the International Chamber of Commerce. They're 3-letter acronyms, and really companies around the world, by and large, have a little more experience with these trade terms than U.S. companies do, because the U.S. market is so big that many companies have been selling in the U.S., of course, for a long time, but are just beginning to sell or buy overseas. And so they maybe haven't been working with those Incoterms as much as their counterparts around the world. So get really familiar with those Incoterms. That's really important, because the Incoterms tell you how much responsibility you have and for what portion of the overall transaction.
Right, exactly.
We try to tell our clients to take a little more responsibility in the Incoterm that they choose, in choosing how the goods are going to move around the world. And it's typical for a company that's just getting started with this to allow their customer or supplier to do more of that, because they may be unfamiliar with how to do it.
Right.
The problem is, when you give up certain levels of control, the outcome is usually not as good, or when those problems occur, like I mentioned earlier, not if, but when they occur, you can't react quite as well, because you've given up control to another party. And so the balance really is to choose an Incoterm that gives you enough control to make sure your interests are protected, and you can adapt if something goes wrong, but not so much control that you have a lot of extra potential cost overruns that you weren't expecting. So a company like mine can help you make the right Incoterm choice, and that's a lot of the time when the right term is chosen, um, sort of the difficulty subsides with the process, you
Right.
know.
Oh, that's beautiful. Also, I like to ask every guest that I host here about success secrets, like in your work, throughout your career. What would you say, maybe one or two success secrets that has continued to help you be successful in your profession?
Well, I would say for us, first of all, having a willing spirit to try something new.
Okay.
Um, you know, it's easy to continue to do the same things over and over, but I think growth, whether it's personal or professional or even sales growth and whatnot, is typically the product of stepping slightly out of your comfort zone and trying something new. So I would say in your business in particular, thinking about what are some things that we could do that we're not doing that probably carry a little bit of risk with them.
Mm.
What we like to do every year is we talk about those things and we sort of rank them from, let's say, least risky to most risky.
Okay.
And most of the time, if we choose to do something, it is in the lesser risky category, but
Right.
we're still trying something new. So I think that's a good one. I tell a lot of people, especially younger people that I have kind of mentored in our business in particular, is be the hardest working person in the room. You don't necessarily have to be the smartest person. If you are the smartest person and the hardest working person, you're going to do very well. But if you're not, the hardest working person tends to, they say the cream rises to the top.
Yeah.
That seems to happen.
Wow.
And so that's usually my advice. If you're super smart, that's just a bonus. But I would say try to be the hardest working person in the room.
Wow, I really appreciate that because we're living at a time, particularly in the world of social media, where many people are looking for shortcuts, right?
Absolutely.
And they think that they really do think one exists.
Yeah.
Right.
I would say it's rare. I mean, it might happen now and again, but my experience anyway is anyone that's had success in business, they've worked for it.
Exactly, because trust me, as a business educator, I try to tell people you're going to solve problems, right? You're a solution provider, you're a problem solver. And the sooner you learn how to solve real good problems in the marketplace, the more value you can contribute, right? So supply chain, logistics, global trade, international trade development. This is as hard as it gets. I call it the Olympics of business. You're competing with the best of the best of the best from all over the world, because it's not just doing business down the streets. It's really literally, overcoming trade barriers and, whether it's tariff or non-tariff barriers. And it does take a level of resilience and grit and patience and tenacity to overcome all of those struggles. And then on the other side is the reward as well, right? Those who actually persevere and pursue international trade development end up growing their economy, right? Economies of nations literally depend on exports.
Yeah, they say every problem's an opportunity depending on your perspective, right?
Exactly. So thank you so much, Paul. This has
Yeah.
been a fantastic conversation. And thank you, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed today's conversation on international trade development. And I look forward to hanging out with you again next week. Thank you.